So, Joanna, yeah, it's great to actually talk to you. I know that we haven't had a chance to really catch up that much, but in terms of sort of your background, you've had such an interesting background, to be frank with you, and how you started the work that you do today.
So I actually started my career as a journalist back when I was 16. So I started to do work experience because that was at the time the kind of advice that you got around, how to get into an industry or sector that you were unfamiliar with and not very well plugged into or connected to. So I started doing work experience and I found it really, really interesting in that it definitely secured that I wanted to go into journalism. But what it also did was kind of demonstrate very quickly how difficult it was for people from particular backgrounds to succeed in that space. So for in my instance, I was from a low socioeconomic background. So, doing the work experience I was doing, especially in magazines, journalism, which was where I was doing it at the time, you didn't really get your expenses paid or anything like that. So because we didn't have this sort of spare money, if you like, to do so lots of unpaid experience slots, if you like. I used to walk to my work experience. I used to not have lunch, and I did that for a really, really long time. I mean, like throughout college, so sixth form college, throughout my degree, and it wasn't really until I got to my MA and I had a Saturday job that paid quite well, because sort of previous Saturday jobs didn't pay that well for the amount of hours I was doing, like combined with studying, and I was based in Reading, and so my travel expenses were slightly higher because I had to come into London during my degree to do work experience. And so I just realised, actually, it's not quite the same as what was happening when I lived on the council estate back in southwest London when I was in sixth form, where I could walk to the work experience. Now I was in Reading, so I had to have the money to get the train down on, say, like a Thursday afternoon and be able to do a day on work experience a week, and then of course throughout the whole kind of Easter and half terms and Christmas holidays. And so I realized really quickly that if you're not from a background where you kind of have that economic support, then you're already at a disadvantage, because you're not even in the pool. They're not even, you're not making contacts, no one's getting to see you, you're not getting any work published, so you've got nothing to use to share with anyone. And so that kind of, when it just opened my eyes really to the inequity that we face. And by we, I mean just anyone really that's from a underrepresented kind of background. So whichever minority you might want to call that. I think what I found also at the time was, although it wasn't as significant to me, I was the only brown person, or if there were others, it was two of us, for example. And I worked across about 7 different media companies. And in fact, I can honestly say that of all the places I worked, there was one magazine that had 2 other ethnic minorities. And bearing in mind, it's 7 media companies, they probably have portfolios of about 30, 40 magazines. So I'm talking about across seven companies with portfolios of 40 plus titles. I can tell you 2 women, and I could tell you who they are today because I'm still in touch with them. So in terms of from an ethnic minority background, so not only did we have low representation from socioeconomic backgrounds, but we also had that with ethnicity. I definitely didn't see anyone with a visible disability until I was about 27, and I started doing work experience when I was 16. So I just realised that it was unfair, and I was uncomfortable with it. And I just thought, how can I do something about it rather than complain? So when I was 18, I started to run a charity called Elevation Networks with 7 of my friends. They still exist. I was with them for about 2 years, and then I set up my first business, Shine Media, and the whole aim really was to increase diversity, initially within the creative sector, but as time's gone on, it's across sectors, so from technology to financial services, and just ultimately the way we do that has just developed, but it's always been pretty much the same approach.
Why do you think those inequalities were there, and why they continue to persist? Because I faced the same thing as well in my life, and I saw that where you started was a big indicator of where you probably finish. And people can move between the socioeconomic groups, but it's really hard. You have to first of all, your role models, your education, everything is so different. So why do you think those inequalities are there, and why do you think they continue to persist?
I think they're there because of structural challenges like those that you've just kind of mentioned. I think this. I think the world or society, certainly in the UK, I'll speak more about that. I think this is the society in the UK, whether it's the education system, the care system, etc., our welfare system, that's the criminal justice system. I think it's set up in a way that will forever, unless we manage to change it, because we're getting there. But we're set up to forever keep a particular group of people in a particular position, and that particular group being those from a particular class. I think we're still very much a class society. So, and just by the very nature of the way that those systems are set up, it means that disproportionately ethnic minorities, those with disabilities, those with a different sexual orientation to the majority, those who don't identify in a particular way, or those with particular strong faith or religious beliefs, and women just fall into these positions where actually it's quite difficult for them to, because of their class, to be able to elevate themselves. And you'd think that the education system here in the UK, where it's a free education system, would level that playing field. But actually, as I say, it's a whole movement, and it's a whole interconnected kind of situation, because yes, we all get to go to school. So I went to school, and I use school very much as my liberator. I use school as a way to educate myself, upskill myself, and to and to then go on to do what I do today. But again, that's come from my parents realizing that there was an important thing that I do. And that was because my dad's from West Africa, so comes to the UK in 74, realizes racial inequity is at its height, and actually that we're going to have to make sure these children are equipped, to manage and maneuver through this inequity. And I just think, like, yes, we all had education and we get access to it, but the fact that I walk myself to school and have to stand in a separate queue for free school meals with a ticket in my hand sends out messages to people, does something to my self-esteem. The fact that my uniform is hand-me-down does something to my self-esteem. If I leave the house in the morning and I've not had breakfast, have I turned up at school with a brain ready to learn and engage? Therefore, will I attain? So we may have access to that, but what everyone needs to be successful, so their equity in those things, is very, very different. And until there are, as I say, additional support for all the external factors that influence the education system, it's not necessarily a leveler in some ways. And it takes if you are from one of those backgrounds, which is slightly, underrepresented, or starting with a disadvantage, and I'm going to say starting with a disadvantage because I don't like describing people from marginalized groups as disadvantaged, because quite often I think they've got huge amounts of things that make them quite advantaged, but there's this hot, nasty rhetoric around people who are not upper class and from a particular educational background that says actually that they're lesser than, when I think they're absolutely more than enough to go forth. It's just that actually the things that they're dealing with externally pose a huge challenge. So for me, I think the reason why it all exists there is because we haven't done anything as a society to support the family, whichever family that is, whether that's two mummies, two daddies, whichever family that is. It hasn't been enough support put around that, perhaps. And then the subcultures that children can pick up based on, where they're living in their environment. We haven't done enough to, intervene there and to put interventions in place. So I feel like the reason it's like that is because just the very structures in which society has been built on is only going to support those who come from a place where perhaps money is not a challenge, additional support is not a challenge. So even if you're struggling with your mental health, there is a family unit around you that can provide you with the relevant resources privately. Perhaps you're not relying on an already stretched out NHS. So I think the list sort of goes on and on and on. But I certainly feel at times it's deliberate.
Yeah, I thought about how we don't have very many black tech founders. And if you really look at the environment that most tech founders grew up in, if you look at the Mark Zuckerbergs or the Steve Jobs, they lived in a certain affluent area. They could get, that 50 or 70,000 to start their first business. If they wanted to get their first client, the kinds of clients they could get in that neighborhood for a tech company versus ones you could get maybe in Peckham if you started a tech company. It's very different, right?
It is.
So I think about it all the time.
I think it takes as well, Saka, I think it takes a whole village. And by that, I mean, and it takes when you're from a particular socioeconomic background, it takes a whole village of support around you. So by that, I mean, so when I first set up my Shine Media, my first organization, I then had to think about an office space because I wanted to run training sessions. Then it's, well, where'd you get the money for the training sessions? So obviously I had a job as a journalist, so I used all of that to pay for that space. But then how was I able to get a space that I could afford? Well, that took a particular borough to have some outreach work that was trying to support young entrepreneurs from particular backgrounds. So that's how I was able to access that. Then you think, right, I need a network. So you go to all these free events, which other people who really care about diversity and inclusion are setting up. So I just think that it takes so much of a village, an intervention. It's not a case of having the resource, sort of in your house. And my mum and dad are incredible, but I sometimes would think to myself, imagine if my mum worked at, there, or at Vogue, or knew so and so. I probably would have had an entirely different journey to one that I had. So I'm very proud of the journey that I had, but I'm just explaining that actually it takes so many key contributing factors to all work in like teachers to care about me. My mum and dad to be from a low socioeconomic background, have all their battles, but say, whatever happens, we're going to try and keep these children on the right path. There's that effort. Then there's the school effort. Then there's a local community effort. Then there's the people that are our local heroes organising programs, schemes, things like the event that you and I sat on to try and upskill and educate these individuals who don't get access to these things. So I just think that the challenge that you have if you come from a sort of a marginalised group is having to forge your own way, having to forge your own path through being so proactive. You just don't have the privilege of going, I'll see how it goes.
Yeah, it's a different thing to have a safety net around you, right? That sense of privilege. It's so different. And I wanted to tie this back into your journey because I know you became an entrepreneur, and I myself am an entrepreneur, and I do different things. But part of being an entrepreneur is having that safety net to know that if you fail, you might at least have a roof over your head, or you're still going to eat. There's a certain level of freedom you have if you know your basic necessities are taken care of. I wanted to touch on how did you start to actually grow your business and that venture from not having a business to actually being a business owner, as you alluded to some of those parts there. But what was that journey like? What were you scared of? What were you afraid of? What was getting funding like? All those types of things.
Yeah, I think it's such a good question, and I'm so glad you asked because I try to be so transparent about this whenever I'm asked about it. It was so hard. It was so hard. It was like, can you imagine from like the age of 18 to 29, I balanced sort of full-time education with full-time work experience, and then and an organization, whether it was Elevation Networks or Shine Media. And so can you imagine how much sleep I didn't get? Like I kid you not, I was exhausted. I don't even remember much of my 20s, like other than all the things I achieved professionally, because I didn't go on holidays with friends, because all the money I had went into this office space or went into that training program that I'm trying to get used to provide opportunities for the next generation of journalists, for example. So there's a huge amount of sacrifice. I couldn't afford the tube. So I would sort of I lived with my dad, and I was on a journalist salary. So to be really to be that transparent, that was like my first salary was like £19,000 a year, which
Wow. That's tough in London.
That's tough in London, right? So then your travel card, I don't know, was something like £100 or something. So I couldn't get the travel card. I had to get a bus pass. But I lived in Battersea, and everything was in central London. So you can imagine like going on a tube is like 20 minutes into central London, and getting a bus was like an hour and a half in rush hour. So you're having to do that. And I know it's a first world problem. I'm not at all like referencing the fact that there aren't people that walk for miles just to get to fresh water. I'm not even trying to make that comparison. I'm just trying to break down like what a day was like. And then you'd kind of do that journey, work all day in a, you know, in a newsroom. Then you'd go out and do all your stories. So you'd go to this red carpet, that event, trying to get stories. You'd finish at like 11, 12. Then I'd get a night bus to my office in Camden and sit there till 4 a.m, trying to run the business. I pretty much did that for like 6.5 years. And I worked on the weekend. So, and with all of that, I earned not a penny. I think the first year I earned any money from anything I was doing, whether it was Elevation Networks or Shine Media, and considering I'd placed probably 1,500 people into work at this point, I didn't earn any money until I was 27.
Wow.
So when I say it was hard, it was so hard. And then you doubt yourself, right? Because you don't have the connections, you know. So even if your organization's like winning awards and people are going, oh, you're doing so well, you don't believe that, because you're still being driven by, if you like, my agent once called it the anger of the inequity that you're seeing all around you for all the people that you are like a huge ally for. And so what would happen was you'd get drawn into the wrong partnerships, because, you know, if that big firm wants to work with me, I must be good. Not because you don't have your own self-worth or your own self-value. You've all of a sudden got, because you've gone from a bedroom business on a borrowed laptop to a huge corporate in multiple territories going, we'd like to work with you. You're so grateful that they'd work with you that you don't even work smartly around, well, what should that look like in a formal relationship, like in terms of financially, but also the relationship that we have. So I think I've made a lot of wrong turns. I've had to pay a hell of a lot of money to lawyers. So I've learned that the hard way. Sorry?
But lawyers for what? What are you paying lawyers for exactly?
So I'd have I'd do a partnership with someone, and being young and kind of fresh-eyed and naive and unaware, I'd not understand something clearly, or it wasn't a fair sort of deal that was happening, or someone was trying to take advantage. And then when I finally found myself realizing that was a situation I was in, I'd have to speak to like someone, you know, close to me would say, you probably need to speak to a coach, or a lawyer, or whoever it might be. And then I'd have to do that and realize half my IP was almost taken, or, you know, my brand's being totally, you know, taken off and derailed off into this direction, not my personal brand, but the brand of the organization. So there was a lot of that. Also being a woman, there were a lot of men that would say they're helping, but not, I don't necessarily think for the right reasons, which eventually would find you in really uncomfortable situations. And as a young woman, it's quite intimidating to find yourself in those environments. And then you might get investment, and actually the investor may have had the best intentions, whether that's been, you know, partnerships that everybody knows about and that I've been very vocal about, or whether it's been sort of private equity investments, and those relationships don't always work. And some people don't know how to actually, don't understand what you've built by yourself, and kind of think that because they're in the larger vehicle that they'll know better about how that works, without really letting you explain how you've built what you've built. And two people to come together with both of their strengths, it can constantly feel a bit like, well, you're too young, you know, we've been doing this for 30 years or 20 years, we know, trust us, kind of thing. And so there's so much that goes on there. You know, you don't trust yourself, you have to learn a lot about money, you have to learn a lot about accountancy, you have to learn a lot about legalities. I'm sure I'm not the only entrepreneur that's been stung a few ways, even in the smallest way. And I don't have any enemies. I've got lovely people that have supported me and been around me, but I just saying that it's like you have to learn some of those things. And when you're from the background I'm from, no one's kind of telling you or preparing you for that. So it's certainly not been easy. Definitely not.
So, I mean, I can resonate with so many different parts of what you're saying. To be honest with you, I remember a time in university and college, and all my friends would be traveling and going for Cancun spring breaks and things like that. And
Yeah.
it was a different story. I remember the one time I couldn't afford to get myself a hot dog. It was like a $1.50 or something like that. And I was like, man, I got to figure something out because if I don't do it, I'm not going to have anything. I actually went to a dentist one time and I couldn't afford to pay the dental bill. So he was like, hey, if you go on campus and sell these toothbrushes and refer people to me, for each person you refer, I'll give you a bit of a discount or something like that. So, it's just that hustle, that mentality that you got to make something out of yourself. Where does yours come from? Where does that drive to succeed? Where does that confidence, where does all that come from?
It's so funny because when you said that, it absolutely is exactly what you have to do. You're constantly thinking on your feet, aren't you? You're constantly thinking, well, I don't have this, so what can I do? And I think that was what was driving me. Also, like my parents, we grew up, my parents were together throughout my whole childhood, but their relationship wasn't always that positive. So certainly our home environment wasn't always the most positive. So I think I realized quite quickly that as they'd told me the most that they knew at that time, which was work hard, try your best at school, have to get good grades, have to go on to university, then you'll get a good job. So I knew that for that moment in my life, that's the best they knew. And then it wasn't until sort of time went on and then they get more experience. Bear in mind, my dad would have only been in the country, like 20 years maybe before. Actually, that's not even true. Maybe like 10 years before I was born. So they're telling me what they know at that time. And I think I realized that I was going to have to find out stuff for myself, that I couldn't rely on other people, that actually my parents had so much going on in their own adult life that they were trying to work through, which now as an adult I can appreciate, that it was always going to be really tough for them to tell me or manage with me and my sister and my brother like what we needed to do. So I think my can came from, well, if I'm looking around and no one else knows, well, I can only look to myself to find out. And I think that's where it came from. I just didn't want, I used to look out the window on the council estate and I'd see people playing around and not always doing the right thing. And I used to think, I just don't want to do that. So what do I need to do to go the other way?
Exactly. I've had that same thought in my mind as well. I look at different instances in my life when I look around and I'm like, this cannot be my life. You know what I mean? Like, it has to be more than this. And it's happened to me at different stages. I remember in university as well. I was like, seeing a lot of people go to regular jobs and staying in them for like 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's not the life I want. Like, that cannot be my life. So at different stages, you just look around and take stock and decide, this cannot be my life. It has to be more. And then it unlocks the mind to think of, okay, then what do I need to do? Who do I need to speak to? Because as you mentioned, your parents might not be the ones to give you that information. You have to seek it out. You got to hustle, quote unquote. But where you are now, and where you're trying to get to, what are the steps you think you need to take in order for you to get there? What does your vision look like? What do you hope in 5 to 10 years time someone can look back and say, wow, Joanna did this, or this is something that's now available because she did this? What are you hoping to achieve?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question and almost one I'm going to probably answer here in the moment because it's a really good question. So Joanna 10 years ago would have said, and she's probably somewhere on something, would have said, I want to have a massive building in Canary Wharf, with Shine Media at the top. I want the top floor office. I want the whole building to be full of people from a broad range of backgrounds, and we're going to be educating society on how to do better at being inclusive. And we'll probably have some magazines in there and some TV channels which also do that and represent that. And I spent 2 years as part of a FTSE 250 company, actually building that out, scaling out a business that would operate in 33 territories. And I realized probably about 18 months in that my idea of just not pleasantness would be managing a lot of people. It's not what I like to do. It's not where my strengths lie. So that vision of having that big building was going to require a lot of management, a lot of stakeholder management, a lot of people management, all of which doesn't excite me, doesn't play to my strengths. So I had to start thinking, so how do you get those the same outcome, which was I wanted to educate the world as far as I could get on how to be more inclusive and more diverse. And so I thought, well, how do I do that without all the pressures of those things? And so now I think I found my rhythm. So I run Blue Moon. We have diversity metrics, we have executive search, and we have diversity and inclusion consultancy. I have between 6 and 10 consultants at any one time that are all associates. So they're all their own business. So I don't have the overheads, but I'm never working alone. So we work together as and when that business requires it. So it meant that I get to empower people to continue being incredible at the different things they're doing, because they're all expert in particular areas of diversity with lived experience. I get to learn from them because they're expert. And I can do all the things I do really well, which is coach, mentor, encourage, motivate, through all the other roles that I have on various boards that I sit on, and the amount of sort of volunteering that I do. So I'm now at a place where I want to continue to run an organization with this sort of associate consultant model that operates globally, which we're doing. I'd like to continue that. But I guess my goal is that I don't have to run this forever, because things would have changed. And then I'd like to go off and spend time doing work with the UN and doing work with I'm very, very interested in human rights. So I'd love to, at some point, do something slightly more specific around that, which I haven't quite worked out. I'm really keen to, and I have plans for, and it's kind of in the making, to do more with government, and to start to try and influence the powers that have the structures as they are. So it stayed the same in terms of the motivation and the purpose, but what that looks like is just different now. It's not a big building. In fact, it's actually me working from home some days in a cottage in the countryside where I can have lots of animals and things. So I think as you get older, you realize that you can have all of the dream, all of the ambition and the achievement and the goals that you wanted, but they don't have to look the way that you think it looks. And actually, one of the chief people officer at S3 told me that, former chief people officer. So she was one of them. Well, she was, the only other. There was 2 women that were at the board, executive board, and so she was, she was constantly referred to as like breaking the glass ceiling. And one of the things that I thought was interesting was when another role came up, which was another C-suite role, slightly more senior than her C-suite role, everyone expected her to go for it. And I remember sitting in her office with her going, how are you finding everything? And you getting, is this pressure getting to you? She said, not at all, because I'm not going to go for it. And I said, why? She said, because when you break down what that actually means from a lifestyle perspective and the day in, day out, I don't want to do that. So I'm not going to do it because that's what success looks like to someone, or the assumption of what success looks like to someone in my position is to keep going that way. I'm just going to do the things I actually like, because that's my sort of definition of success. And so literally that was one of the most liberating pieces of advice I've ever been given, because since then I sit on a number of boards as a non-exec and a trustee. I'm a governor of lots of schools, and I get to do the work that I do in my business. So I get to do absolutely everything I want to do and aim to do, without having a team of like 100 people that I need to be responsible for and motivate, which isn't a strength of mine. So I hope that answers it, and I hope it gives a bit of advice in there too, that it can change, and like that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's great, especially because touching on the notion of success in the Black community and across the world, in Africa and America here as well, we typically emulate people because we think there's a certain lifestyle that comes with success, and you define your success by what you see other people who are deemed as successful are, right? So in the Black community, you see a lot of rappers, or you see a lot of musicians, or you see a lot of sports players. Those are the people that are successful. So of course, there's going to be a lot of kids or youth. I want to get into that, but the idols in the sort of corporate world, or people like yourselves who eventually get some sort of recognition. Thankfully, I mean, you became an MBE, which is some recognition, but I don't think there are enough role models there to show others that there is another way, and there are Black successful people in corporate or startups or tech entrepreneurs and things like that. Is this a challenge you see in your work as a DNI sort of recruiting? There's very few people to speak to or to show, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think you're right. I think there are huge efforts, and some are hugely successful at demonstrating the Black role models that we have. For example, like the Power List Foundation, the Empower List, the National Diversity Awards. There are so many, like the Precious Awards, the Black Women in Business Awards. I think there's a lot of organizations that are out there trying to say, we exist and we are promoting the position, influence, achievements of, in particular, sort of Black and brown people. And I think that, but having said that, although we have those vehicles and they're incredibly important, those individuals themselves are underrepresented in most organizations. So while it can look like a huge talent pool, of which it is on paper, when you go into those individual companies, in fact, they're fighting their own internal fight there, because they're still not the equity that they deserve, or being sort of introduced for future generations. So I think it's sad, because I always say, like, diversity is the only way. Any other way doesn't make sense. Inclusion to me is the only way anything will work. If you don't understand people and the different needs that they have, customer, client, stakeholder, manager, employee, nobody thrives. But I think that people, as I say, it's back to that original question. The structures benefit particular groups of people, and until they feel comfortable that actually there's enough space for it to benefit other people that don't look like you or sound like you or don't have the same body as you, we're never really going to see that change. And I certainly think that what I do is I highlight the work that organizations are doing to encourage candidates to know who those companies are, so I can start to see them, with or without my support with the organization I run, but start to go into those businesses and drive and continue to drive the ambitions that they hold for a more inclusive workplace. But equally, it's about saying, if they're not going to invite you to the table, like, go create your own. If they can't see your worth, like, more for them. Go and create something where people will see that, and where you can empower hundreds more to believe in themselves. And I know that sounds very, like, worthy and righteous, but I've seen it happen so many times. If you look at some of the most incredible people in my network, a lot of them have felt rejection. They have been rejected. They have been alienated. They have been capped. They've had someone they've had to get through concrete ceilings, glass ceilings, and they can't. And so, and then they've gone off and said, well, I'm not going to sit here worrying about trying to convince you that I'm great. I'll go and do something with people that can see that value. And so I think while we have a challenge, there are huge efforts. It's important that those of us who have had a light shone on us, that we continue to have conversations like this that you're having on your podcast, Saka, so that people get more and more access and awareness of different journeys, different expertise. And certainly that we use our voices where we can to just keep tackling and challenging who we give attention to.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I'm curious to get your thoughts on, well, I want to say the Black experience, but on sort of the British way of looking at the world versus sort of the American way versus sort of the African way. I don't know, maybe on TV or your relatives that are in Africa, but just the difference of culture and experiences, perhaps not just for Black people, but for minorities in America versus here. And the reason I'll ask that is because I've experienced what it's like to be Black on 3 different continents. In America, they have a very different way of looking at things, in Africa and in Britain as well. And in America, it seems like because they were so collectively disenfranchised, they had to form these groups very early on. And so you have things like the United Negro College Fund, or historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, like, Morehouse and, all these places. So there seems to be a stronger economic unit, and Blackness is sort of very unified. But over here, you got the Jamaican crew, you got the Nigerians, you got the Ghanaians, and all that. So I'm just wondering about your thoughts on the difference of culture or the difference of attitudes or perceptions depending on your geographic location or your cultural background.
I think you make a really good point, because this is just my personal observation. I think I've traveled and worked a lot in America, and I've always been impressed by how not modest they are. So, for example, I get into a taxi in New York, or I'm in LA, or I'm in Nevada, or I'm in Dallas, and you ask someone what they do, they'll tell you what they do, and they don't just do one thing, they do a number of things, and they say all really proud, chest held high. And because of that, I think their confidence means that it's that ambition, that drive, their confidence motivates. I think I remember going to New York for the first time and thinking, am I lazy?
Says the girl who worked for 6 to 7 years
Yeah,
without taking
actually, but you go to New York, I was tired just speaking to people sometimes, because I thought I was busy, and then I got to New York and I just thought it was another level of drive. They say it's a city that never sleeps, and I feel that every time. I feel that every time I go there. Then you go to somewhere like the UK, and we're expected to be really grateful. Don't talk too much about your achievements. Don't do that. You be modest, you be humble, you go in, you support others, you think about, like, it's very much like that. And yeah, and then sometimes when there is achievement, it's important that we recognize it. But I think sometimes when there is achievement, organizations will kind of make a big deal of it, and sometimes I think that's great. And other times I think, do you make a big deal of it because you don't expect any more from your disabled colleague? Would you make a big deal of it because you're so shocked that your lesbian colleague does this, or you can't believe a black man's been able to articulately do that? Or but do you know what I mean? Sometimes, yeah. So I want the celebration, because of course if you worked hard, absolutely, but I wonder if sometimes are we applauding this person because they're brilliant, or are we thinking, and they're disabled and they managed to do that? That I'm uncomfortable with. But I think that happens here in the UK. Like, people don't want to sit on panels because they're black. They want to sit on a panel because they're brilliant at their job, and that's why they've been called upon. Yeah. A disabled person doesn't want to be called upon because they're disabled. They want to be able to be called upon because they're brilliant at whatever it is that they're going to talk about. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes I struggle with here. And again, we have to play it down. And then when we are given an opportunity, we have to be incredibly grateful. Oh, thank you for giving me this, this little Indian man a job. Thank you so much. And if we go in, we must never make a mistake, because if we make one mistake, career suicide. If a white, middle class, highly educated Etonian male makes a mistake, give him a few more chances. It wasn't his fault. He didn't understand. Blah, 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 blah. And there'll be excuses. But I certainly found the creative industries, if any of my people that I placed into work, whether they were from a different ethnicity or religious group, if they made a mistake, they better believe they've made a mistake. They're going to know they made a mistake, and it's going to be really difficult for them to move on and past it. And there is this element of, we gave you a chance that you should have gone 10 times harder than the others. But that's because of, privilege and superiority that comes into play there. But then if I go to Africa, what I find there, and this is just my observation, I feel like they work so hard. I don't think they play to the rhetoric that some of the adverts that campaigns that charities use speak of. I think actually they want the pride. I think they want their governments and to give them the opportunities to have their dignity, to earn an honest living, to provide for their families. And I sense a real humility, hunger and drive when I'm back home, if you want to call it that, in Ghana. I feel like, and certainly the work that's been done here for the Ghanaian diaspora, and getting them to connect back to Ghana and contribute there is certainly a testament to the fact that they're saying, you know, not only have we got talent and hardworking people here in Ghana, but we have them also situated all over the world, and how we form in relationships with them to see the benefits of that. So I think they have been my 3 observations, actually, of my experience in those places.
Yeah, I won't go into the details of whether Ghanaian or Nigerian jollof is better. I'll keep that at the side for now. Because
It's
I'm
one of those
Nigerian.
cultural debates, definitely.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I mean, I'm Nigerian, so you know, I'm very sensitive to these discussions. So we'll park that for
Oh
now. But
no, no. Has anything that I said, do you disagree with in your observations?
no, no, I think you're right. I think people work very hard back at home, and it's a matter of they don't have very many other options. There's a large
Mm.
informal economy. There's not a very big formal economy, and in that informal economy, you're forced to become an entrepreneur. So everyone is selling 2 or 3 things, or like they have so many businesses at the same time. So I definitely don't discount that. I think it's very very accurate. The only difference is that I've experienced living in Botswana and South Africa, as well
Oh.
as Nigeria and Ghana, and in Kenya as well.
Mhm.
So I always tell people that the difference between someone from Botswana and Nigeria is greater than the difference between maybe a Nigerian and like an American,
Mhm.
even though we're on the same continent,
Mhm.
because they are literally night and day. I mean, Nigerians are full of energy and they want to get things done, and then people from Botswana are just relaxed and
Yeah,
just
I've
want to
been to Botswana. I've spent time there. I worked.
oh
Yeah, I worked. I was in Clockweng, Suroe,
yeah yeah yeah
and uh, I want to call it. Oh, I want to call it Knightstown, but I know it's not right.
Francistown.
No, that's so annoying. Suroe, Clockweng,
Peakway.
Francistown, Francistown.
Yeah, Francistown. Yeah, 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 yeah. So my mom used to live there, and we lived in a place called Peakway, Celebi Peakway. But now we live in Gaborone, which is the capital. Well, I say
Yeah.
now we're in the UK, but yeah. But yeah, no, that's great. Unfortunately, we're kind of out of time. I think we could have
Yes.
spoken for hours. We'll have to do this another time. But
Yeah.
thanks so much for joining.
No worries at all. Thank you for having me.